Now, this is what was previously called the Tavern Room and what we use as our main Civil War exhibit space. Okay. So Pope's Tavern Museum, we explore domestic life in the antebellum period, which is the side of the house where we just were, and the Civil War in the Tennessee Valley in North Alabama. And my area of expertise as a historian is in the Civil War in the Tennessee Valley of North Alabama.
Let's dive in.
And
see right here, Lost in Coffee.
Yes.
So I'm assuming, obviously, that he was enslaved by the coffee man on the other side.
Most likely. That's where the surname most likely would have come from. Either that he was enslaved originally by a man named Coffee and perhaps was, sold to another enslaver. But that most likely is going to be where his surname comes from. Okay. Living somewhere in the Big Bend of the river, in the western side of Lauderdale County. I like to talk about Lawson Coffee in the context of not only a diversity of experience of the war here in Lauderdale County, but because he and other enslaved people followed Union forces to their headquarters where they were able to escape bondage. And so talking about troop movements and raids and what that meant for local people, how it's not really a net positive or a net negative, depending on who you ask. Because if you have Union soldiers coming through, for enslaved people, from day one, from the first time Union boots are on the ground in Florence, enslaved people are following Union soldiers back to their encampments and gaining freedom, liberation for themselves by serving the United States war effort.
Sure.
Now, by 1863, whenever the Emancipation Proclamation has come into effect, you actually start to see the recruitment and the uniforming of enslaved people, formerly enslaved people, into regiments of infantry. This is a major development at the time. So not only were formerly enslaved people serving the United States war effort by driving wagons, by laboring to construct railroad trestles, fortifications. It's important to know the Confederates also used enslaved labor for those purposes, to construct railroads, bridges, fortifications. But by the time the Emancipation Proclamation comes into effect, you actually start to see the arming and uniforming of infantry of formerly enslaved people from across the Tennessee Valley and North Alabama. Right. Corinth, Mississippi is an early rally point for formerly enslaved people to join the federal standard. Brigadier General Grenville Dodge is particularly active in organizing and arming recruits from formerly enslaved populations. Okay. And then later on, Pulaski, Tennessee becomes the local hub for those kinds of efforts.
Giles County.
Giles County,
and that's where the Klan started.
Pulaski, Tennessee is a stronghold for United States forces. Really, from the spring of 1864 on through the bitter end and the earliest days of Reconstruction. And I think that it's probably not coincidental then that that's why that sort of seething resentment that boils over into the activities of the first iteration of the Klan are centered in and around Giles County, Tennessee.
Yeah, sure.
But again, really active recruitment and arming of formerly enslaved people into regiments of infantry, among them Lawson Coffee. Yeah. So it's important to know that as Union soldiers are moving through, it presents an opportunity for people to reclaim their personal agency and make a decision for their own benefit, to put their lives at risk, because escaping enslavement and going behind Union lines could be a death sentence for some people because it's still a war. And you see as well, for example, with Fort Henderson in Athens, with General Forrest's raid in September and October 1864, whenever formerly enslaved people who are in United States uniforms are captured by Confederate forces, they're often sent back down south in bondage. So it not only is the risk of death in battle, but of being sent back into enslavement by Confederate forces. And Forrest himself is active in doing this.
Yeah, and I'm thinking it with Sarah Moore Jackson, because she was the one who was alive during the time.
Yes.
Because James Jackson had died in 1840. That's why she sent my grandfather back down here, as well as others, because the Confederate had a stronger hold further south than being in Tennessee, where you're a stone's throw away from Kentucky, and then
Yes.
what's next from Kentucky? You got Ohio and Indiana. So
Exactly.
they were getting them back down south for sure.
Well, and Tennessee is also a stronghold of United States forces. From an early point in the war, February 1862, Nashville is captured by federal forces and held throughout the war. Tennessee is actually exempted from the Emancipation Proclamation. And part of the reason is that it's under military occupation by the United States. In practice, however, the Emancipation Proclamation is as good in effect in Tennessee as it was everywhere else on the ground. It's just that they were legally exempted. So it makes sense why she would want her enslaved.
Bring it back to Alabama.
Yes.
So obviously we're in the South, and so you got to have the flag, right? Like when we talk about holistic history, and we got to tell it all, right? So
what's interesting is that this flag itself is not contemporary to the Civil War.
Okay.
It is used later on in, I believe this one specifically in around the turn of the 20th century, in the early 1900s.
Okay, I see a reunion battle flag.
With the United Confederate Veterans. So this was actually used in the period really of the height of the Lost Cause, in around the turn of the 20th century. And the image of the Confederate battle flag by this point has been very well appropriated by those Confederate veteran groups. It's not actually contemporary to the war itself. So it's part of this larger conversation about how the ideology, about how the civil rights gains of people of color in the South in the outcome of the war have been taken and reshaped and reappropriated, and something that we still grapple with constantly today. And people's understandings and misunderstandings about what caused the war, what the war was about, and what the outcomes meant for people.
For sure.
And this is part and parcel to that. Because if you, for example, read the speech of the dedication of the Confederate monument at the courthouse in Lauderdale County, it's very clear that this image and the image of the South, the erstwhile Confederacy, walk hand in hand with the notions of white supremacy, and that society is ordered in a certain way for a certain reason, to reward a certain class of people and to keep other people in, quote unquote, in their place. And so this is the image then that is the emblem of that entire philosophy and why it was utilized in that way. But again, as I say, we deal with that on a day-to-day basis. One of our docents, very talented, Dina, she has recently put together PowerPoint presentations, a number of them including the history of the Klan, the Lost Cause narratives, and evidence from the 19th century that the Civil War was about slavery. Because we have people who come in and constantly try and...
Heritage.
Yes, well, heritage, not hate, or that it was about states' rights, or it was about X, Y, Z. And I think, this is my hypothesis, but I think that the reason why people tend to try and downplay the role of enslavement in the war itself is to downplay the civil rights gains made by formerly enslaved people in the decades after the war, and with the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. So in other words, if the war wasn't really about slavery, then we don't have to really pay attention to all of those pesky civil rights gains that formerly enslaved people now have. And we can kind of all get together and sing Kumbaya and reminisce about our glory days in battle, and well, we were just fighting for what we thought was right in this kind of nebulous, abstract way, which is what you hear people say. We have to constantly remind people that Confederates, secessionists, were perfectly aware that what they were doing was a direct response to defend the Southern slaveocracy and their so-called right to enslave and buy and sell women and children, men, women, and children. This is something that the Supreme Court actually upheld with the Dred Scott decision in 1857. It found that enslaved property was covered by the Constitution. It was constitutional. And to prevent by any means the spread of enslavement into the territories of the West, or even in the so-called free states of the North, was unconstitutional. Now, part of, again, the appropriation, the appropriation of the image of people of color within the Lost Cause and within the South at the turn of the 20th century especially. This is a photo of a meeting of Confederate veterans held here in Florence. You will notice on the margins of the picture to the left that there are a number of African-American gentlemen.
Yep, right here.
Among them, Reuben Patterson. Now, Reuben Patterson was an enslaved man in Lauderdale County who was part of the Confederate war effort because he was enslaved by his so-called master, Josiah Patterson. And Reuben Patterson is notorious here. I say notorious, but he's well known here locally, especially because he attended Confederate veteran meetings. And I think the story of Reuben Patterson has been taken and appropriated by someone who has a very specific axe to grind. And to say, well, see, the war couldn't have been about slavery because here's a black man who's attending a Confederate veterans meeting. How do you explain that? There are a number of ways that I explain that. First of all, and there are a number of people here locally, in local historical circles that, to be quite honest, I disagree with in terms of the vocabulary and the way that we talk about someone like Reuben Patterson, because oftentimes you see him described as a Confederate veteran. And I take issue with this because the Confederacy never armed enslaved people in infantry regiments. Absolutely never. It was proposed in the last dying days of the Confederacy, but it was vehemently opposed. So Reuben Patterson is not someone, in other words, who woke up one day and said, you know, I think I'm going to fight for the Confederacy. He was an enslaved person. He did not have the personal agency to make that choice. He was ordered by his enslaver to serve in an ancillary role within a Confederate encampment. I think it is a false equivalency to call someone like Reuben Patterson a veteran when Lawson Coffey escaped bondage, took his life into his own hands, and voluntarily enlisted in a United States infantry regiment. Lawson Coffey is a veteran. Now, also very telling in this is that by the time you get to the 1920s, someone like Reuben Patterson, who's well in old age and has experienced...
He was born in 1833, it says.
Yes. Thereabouts. So someone who's experienced the ups and downs, has seen the star of Reconstruction rise and fall, and has witnessed the birth of the Klan and the dedication of the Confederate monument. He found it more advantageous for himself in the social scheme of the day to play into the notion of the docile, the Confederate veteran, than to play against it.
From an economic standpoint.
From a socioeconomic standpoint, absolutely. He found that it was more advantageous for him to play into that rather than play against it. And I think that that's really the true story in there that almost no one who loves to appropriate his image and his story acknowledges. And so that's why I point that out. This is our hospital exhit. And it creeps people out with the napkins.
When I stepped in the room, I was like, wait a minute.
So it is claimed about this house that it was a hospital for Union and Confederate soldiers.
Right.
I do not have any evidence that that is true. There's a lot of good circumstantial evidence. We know elsewhere here in Lauderdale County that anytime there was a skirmish or large troop movements coming through, that private residences were used to house sick and wounded soldiers. Mostly the people who lived there, out of a sense of humanitarian kindness, took soldiers into their homes. And it's true that they did so irrespective of the uniform that the person wore. The trouble is I don't have anything specific that ties this site to the use of a hospital. It's just circumstantial. But when we think about the numbers of troops that came through Lauderdale County, it's almost impossible that any structure that existed here at that time would have avoided some kind of impact. So for example, in the summer of 1862, the Army of the Ohio crossed about 24,000 men across the Tennessee River at Florence. This is at a time when the city of Florence has about 1,000 people. So we're talking about 24 times the local population, just in soldiers. That's not even including the animals who also have to eat. General William Tecumseh Sherman moves through the Shoals in the fall of 1863 with another 3 divisions. We're talking another 20 to 30,000 men. The Confederate John Bell Hood crosses the Tennessee River at Florence in October and November 1864 with 34,000 men.
Goodness.
So tens of thousands of soldiers moving through a relatively small community. We know that structures that existed here would have been used for quartering officers, soldiers, and probably would have been used for reconnaissance or for convalescence as well. So there's really good circumstantial evidence. We just don't have any definitive evidence.
Gotcha.
This is a portrait of William, aka Billy Patton, who was son of
Sweetwater
Plantation,
Sweetwater, which is supposedly haunted here.
Well, you're asking the stick in the mud. People love to talk about the paranormal.
Are there bodies buried in the basement of that place?
I feel like I'm not professionally qualified to make such speculations.
I got you.
There are those out there who will tell you yay, and I'm sure those out there who will tell you nay. And I will let them slug it out. That's not my fight today.
I got you.
But we do talk about Sweetwater Plantation and Billy Patton because Billy Patton is killed at the Battle of Shiloh.
Yeah.
And Robert Miller Patton is also a very significant enslaver in 1860. He will go on to be the first Reconstruction era governor of the state of Alabama and is locally very prominent for that reason. But
now, what was life like post-emancipation here? I saw something about rapier on the one of the panels out here. So post-emancipation, all the troops and everyone is out, are out. What was it like here in the city of Florence?
So I will admit that my knowledge really falls off a cliff after 1865. Okay. So I'm a historian of the war itself. I can tell you more about the transitional period. So in the summer of 1865, after the hostilities have ceased, the local citizens here in Florence had written to the federal officers at Pulaski asking them to send in United States soldiers to act as a police force, to get a clamp on the lawlessness and violence and depredations that had become endemic at that time. And so they invited federal soldiers to stay throughout the summer of 1865 so that they could reestablish their courts, reestablish law and order and civil government for themselves. Now, as far as rapier and others, it's really in those first gasps of the Reconstruction period in the late 1860s and early 1870s that there is really a revolutionary explosion in political participation of formerly enslaved, of people of color. And I believe this is at the time period when South Carolina had its only ever lieutenant governor who was a person of color. Is that right?
Yeah, during Reconstruction.
Reconstruction, yes. And
that's because this is what I saw. And that's
it's over 100 years before Alabama will have another representative who is a person of color. And so it's a lot very quickly. And I know that there is a beginning of migration for those who are able to leave the South. It begins around the time of Reconstruction. And there is a lot of resentment that builds within the community on all sides for sort of the government dropping the ball and not living up to the promises that were made in the beginning and not putting in the effort to enforce those revolutionary changes. And they're very quickly undone by the powers that be. And
I mean, look, right here. I mean, listen, he lost.
Yes.
So in 1872, he was elected to Congress, the 2nd District of Alabama. 1874, he lost to ex-Confederate Joe Wheeler. It would be over 100 years before Alabama was to elect another African-American congressman. Now, 100 years, so 1974, man.
It's very interesting as well to think about political power and socioeconomic power in the slavocracy and how robust that power was to survive the war and even to survive the emancipation of enslaved people. And so what you find, there's a book by Douglas Blackman called Slavery by Another Name. What you find is that a lot of these former enslavers and aristocrats in the antebellum period, they pick up the pieces very quickly and become the industrialists of the New South. and find that the system of convict leasing is far more profitable than enslavement ever was.
For sure.
And they pick back up and become the robber barons of the Gilded Age.
Yeah.
And again, that is a very robust system that adapts very quickly. And I think you can see that as well in the swift erosion of those brief gains of political power of formerly enslaved people. That the old order just dusts itself off and picks back up with a vengeance.
Yep, it just mutated.
Yes, by another name, yes.
By another name. So are we able to go upstairs?
Sure.
To check that out? I know that I feel special because it's close to the
yes.
public. But,
let me get a sip of my coffee.
Yeah, no problem. And this is one of ours, so I'll just make sure to keep it there.
Okay.
All right,
and
let's head
do
up.
what's your step. I will let you lead the way.
All right, cool.
Now,
I've never been up here before.
previously, this was used as exhibit space.
Okay.
But these stairs are really treacherous, and I can't imagine inviting people who have mobility issues or even small kids
Well,
to
yeah,
come
it
up and
definitely
down.
doesn't meet ADA standards, that's for sure.
That's part of the many pratfalls of operating a museum out of a 19th century structure is that it does not lend itself well to accessibility.
All right, so we have some pictures down here. These are all donated by local folks?
So everything that you see up here in core collection storage are properties of the museum that have been donated over the years. Many of them have previously been on display in previous iterations of the museum.
Okay.
So when the museum opened in the late 1960s, it's really just a catch-all cabinet of curiosities where people just kind of walk in and ooh and ah and say, ah, wow, how weird life used to be back then. Wasn't life funny? And so, for example, we have a gramophone, and previous curators I know would demonstrate. We have also a wax cylinder Edison gramophone here, which is totally operational. But so that's sort of the way that they approached what this museum was, which is this kind of...
Do we know whose dress this was?
Yes, and you ask me, and I cannot remember her name, but we have a photo of the bride in her wedding gown. This dates from 1905.
1905.
It's 120 years old, and we know because of the photograph, because of the announcement of the wedding that was in the newspaper.
Okay.
And the style of the clothing actually is also very emblematic of around 1900 to 1910, 1905. A ton of spinning wheels, a ton of pieces of furniture, and again, these are things that are sort of left over from previous iterations of this museum when it was kind of this Disneyland cosplay backdrop of just anything old and funny. But then also at points in the past, it has been a catch-all military museum.
Okay.
So what you see behind you are our collection of Mauser rifles, mostly German manufacturers from the late 1870s on up to the First World War. Sabers, yes, cavalry sabers,
Is that
bayonets.
the correct name when you say saber? When I said sword, is that the same?
I believe so. I think that the difference is that sabers are more ceremonial. But do not quote me on that. I don't actually know. But they are no longer functional. They've had their firing hardware removed. But they're antique. And they come from a period of time. And you saw, of course, our scale model of the Forks of Cypress plantation. It's interesting because here locally there seems to be an obsession with the image of this house, of this site. I mean, there's a scale model replica on Tuscaloosa Street, which is the Regions Bank. So there's, again, this obsession with this image, almost like this Gone with the Wind aggrandizement of this image of the romantic antebellum South.
There's a lady.
I believe Annie Huff is the name of the woman there. This is our archaeology lab. And if Dina was here, she could tell you much more about that. Dina is our resident archaeologist. So as we talked about in the beginning of this tour, there's so much that we don't know about this site, and so much besides that has been claimed about it that we can't verify. So at a certain point, Brian has walked all of these paths before me. I'm really just following in his footsteps, but we have exhausted what is available in the historical record. We have found all the documents there are to find about this site. And we are still left with so many more questions than answers. And a way to fill in the blanks and to tell a more honest and comprehensive narrative of this site are to literally dig in the ground. Or to dig under the house. Brian, there's a hatch in the floor in the main room that Brian gets under the house and digs up to see what's there. We find pieces of pottery, nails, buttons, tons and tons of bones. Mostly not human bones.
That was
we would have a serious problem if we found human bones. But it's mostly poultry, rodents, and beef. Animals that are kept for domestic purposes. Sure. And also some anomalies, like they found a moon pie wrapper that probably dates from the 1970s.
Oh wow!
And a hat pin from the Boer War, which probably dates from the late 1890s. Now again, this site has been heavily altered, even just in the past 60 years. But also in the late 1980s, they had to replace all the floors. They replaced the floor joists and redid the foundation. So the house has had serious structural work done in the past 60 years, which I think probably is the reason why they found the moon pie wrapper. Some worker was enjoying his lunch one day and just threw it down and said, well, no one's ever going to see that again.
Right. Can we walk to the back real quick where the cistern is?
Sure.
And
so the cistern was found completely by accident. They were removing a boxwood hedge along the fence whenever they uncovered it. It's interesting because that 1860 classified advertisement that I mentioned, it specifies that there are 2 cisterns on the site. Now the other one is underneath the shed where the wagon sits. They filled it in the 1970s.
Gotcha.
So this one was out there somewhere. They found it. The brickwork is original 19th century. They excavated it, and what they found mostly were spark plugs, windshield wiper blades, light bulbs.
People were just dumping stuff.
Garbage, yes. So after it ceased being functional as a cistern sometime in the early 20th century, people just started discarding their automotive waste in their windshield wipers, and spark plugs.
How far down does this go?
I think they augured down to 20 feet, 16 to 20 feet.
Really?
Dina would be able to know for sure. She was involved in that project, but it goes down quite a way. They didn't actually take all the dirt out of it. They used an auger to take a core sample, and that's where they found those particular items. We're actually we're undergoing right now a landscape overhaul. So we have received a grant from the Alabama Humanities Alliance to redo our landscaping to hopefully feature an outdoor classroom space and native plant garden. So again, the museum has just been so many different things to different curators in the 60 or so years that it's been open. And everywhere there are just these little relics of those previous versions of the museum. So one of the early sponsors of the Pope's Tavern site was the Florence Garden Club. And so that's part of the reason why there's this azalea garden with oak leaf hydrangeas and just anything that looks pretty is because the garden club sponsored it.
For sure.
Also the United Daughters of the Confederacy, and that's part of the reason why we have the relics and artifacts that we have are because this site was sponsored directly by the UDC. Ironically, the Daughters of the Confederacy gave us the portrait of Henry Cox Jones, who is one of Lauderdale County's delegates to the Alabama Secession Convention. And I say ironically because Jones and his other delegate, Posey, voted against the secession ordinance. North Alabama is opposed to secession. Every county in Alabama north of the Warrior River, the entire upper third of the state of Alabama, votes against the secession ordinance. So it's kind of ironic to think that the Daughters of the Confederacy would donate his portrait whenever he voted not to secede. But again, sort of part of this concerted effort to reappropriate the narratives of the war in a way that literally whitewashes over the causes and the outcomes. So.
Well, you've done an amazing job of just kind of breaking down things based on myth and truth, right? And I think that's just so important, especially when I come to historic sites. Like I always am curious on just how in-depth and truthful people are going to be on the site. And some people may be watching this and be like, oh, well, this was a waste of time because everything that one may have thought to be the truth about the Pope's Tavern, it's not. So what was the point? But I think what happens is you bring a complete new narrative on how the interpretation of this site should be told, which is beautiful. And I greatly appreciate that, especially also the additional work that you all are doing to make this space a classroom space and all the other things in which you all are doing to be able to tell a more accurate history, which is so important.
Right.
So for you, in closing, what does this site represent, or what can it represent now that you're on board, Brian's here, Dina, and you all are, Dina, right?
Yes,
I did get
exactly.
that right.
Good job. I'm bad with names.
I know,
so.
right? I am too. But you have your teeth sunk into this project, and how important is that going to be for future generations that come to the site?
That's a great question, and really a fundamental existential question that we're trying to address whenever we are about to start our strategic planning process. We want this to be a space where the community sees itself, where the community participates in the creation of our collective understanding of what the past was. And I think that that's why telling an honest and open narrative, even to say what people claimed in the past is unsubstantiated, or we simply don't know, or what is circumstantial, what is likely, being honest and open is part of creating that dialogue, where, again, a space where the community feels like it has a role, a place to participate, a place to see themselves and to be heard. And especially when we consider how the site has been used in the 60 years or so that it's been opened, and the kind of narratives that it has preferred, the kinds of narratives and apocryphal tales that it has preferred to all others, it gives us a chance to do something more substantial, to do something that helps take the past with all of its collective traumas, with all of the good, bad, and the ugly, but to acknowledge where we came from and why and how, as a starting place to build something better in the future that is based on dialogue and openness and honesty.
Sweet.
That's what we aspire for.
And you're doing it, for sure.
Thank you.
Well, listen, that's it for another episode of History Before Us here at Pope's Tavern in Florence, Alabama. Like I always say, if you like this type of content, please make sure to subscribe and share. Peace and blessings.